first it was Amy Coney Barrett's majority decision, or majority opinion rather, that that a lot of people saw. But then people even started, myself included, looking at Ketanji Brown's dissent, and it was ridiculous. And some people think it was written by AI. I'm actually not sure. I think she wrote this herself in some extent. I mean, she's got slang in there. She's got millennial colloquialisms in there. I mean, Will, just give us the context. Is this the type of stuff that we usually see coming out of a Supreme Court?
No, I don't think I've seen a more strident dissent ever. And I've read some very aggressive dissents from people like Scalia, who is known for writing very pointed dissents, but this was extremely strident and flippant. And as a result, she got smoked in the majority opinion in very aggressive terms. And I talked a lot about this last week with a few people, but it's not just that Justice Barrett put out this opinion. It's that 6 conservative justices signed on to an opinion that was overtly mocking of Justice Jackson's legal reasoning. And that really shows that, I mean, the bulk of the court basically just doesn't even take her seriously anymore. They don't think she's smart. And that's not good for her because she's in the minority. So, she's just going to get to write furious, weak, pointless dissents for the next, 20 years until the Democrats get a majority again. She won't be able to have any meaningful influence over the bulk of the court. She won't be able to pull them onto her way on a moderate case. If they end up agreeing with her, it's despite her, not because of her.
Well, and so and this is crazy, right? This is this idea that you would even have judge and by the way, Will, so even though Amy Coney Barrett she authored the opinion, the other justices, including Chief Justice Roberts, signed off on this. So they saw what she wrote and said, "Yeah, I endorse that."
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. They were willing to have her have 6 justices criticized her dissent as not being based in law at all.
Wow.
And you have to go back to, I mean, what is her theory? Her theory is that the judicial power is basically unconstrained and judges should go around unprompted by a case or controversy, unconstrained by laws passed by Congress or the Constitution, saying, you, the executive, are doing something illegal, stop it. And it's like, that's not our system of government, because that would place the Supreme Court above the executive and legislative branches. And we have a co-equal system of government with co-equal branches. And in the same way that the executive and legislative branches are constrained in various ways, so is the court. And the court is constrained both by the Constitution and by laws passed by Congress, and therefore can't actually do anything it wants, can't stop every instance of illegality in the executive branch because its own jurisdiction is constrained.
And this is something where, and I read through a ton of her dissent. I mean, it's actually kind of interesting because you could almost label this the no kings dissent, because that's what she kept trying to say over and over and over. Oh, America doesn't have a king. America doesn't have a king. And then she cited Hamilton. So she cites Hamilton as this, who is, and I realized something. I said, wait a minute, this just goes back to my contention. These are all theater kids. They get all of their actual knowledge of history from media and the consumption of fiction rather than reality. Because one thing, of course, that they don't mention in the Hamilton musical, or at least not in any great extent, is that Hamilton, of course, Alexander Hamilton, was famously a monarchist. He wanted a king. He was one of the people who was championing for this. And in fact, the reason that we have the Constitution at all is because the previous system, which lacked an executive, fell apart and collapsed. The entire point of the exercise of creating the Constitution was to create a stronger executive, but also place it within the bounds of these checks and balances of the judiciary and the legislature. But Will, in her in nowhere in her dissent did she seem to have any even understanding of this.
No, if anything, she criticized it as legalese. I mean, I actually have her opinion pulled up. You should just read from this, because people need to understand what this dissent said. Quote, "To hear the majority tell it, this suit raises a mind-numbingly technical query. Are universal injunctions sufficiently analogous to the relief issued by the High Court of Chancery in England at the time of the adoption of the Constitution? But that legalese is a smokescreen." I'm sorry, whoa, step back. You're mocking, and the whole point of her dissent is this argument, we must force the executive to follow the law. And then when the majority says, whoa, 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 we also need to follow the law. Here is the law that governs our authority and exactly how far it reaches. She's like, oh, that's a dumb, mind-numbingly technical legalese inquiry. Well, then couldn't you say the same about whatever your criticism of the executive branch is? Like, the executive could get up and say, well, yeah, the Supreme Court's making this argument about what I can and can't do, but that's a mind-numbingly technical legalese theory. I'm going to do what I want. It's internally inconsistent, dramatically so.
Right, and of course, this part of the thesis of the book that Joshua Lysek and myself put out last year, The Unhumans, Secret History of Communist Revolutions and How to Crush Them, was this is exactly what they do. They do this every time, where they say this power it's essentially, it's akin to just sort of the meme of saying it's good when I do it and it's bad when you do it. And it really just comes down to that. And, I'm sorry to the folks who get upset when I say this, but this is why the friend-enemy distinction exists in politics. That sometimes it's just these people are my friends and I like them, and these people are my foes and I dislike them. And that's really all it comes down to. So I wish, by the way, that we could go back to the previous systems and actually have this, system of law and checks and balances and all this, right? But when you have people like Ketanji Brown Jackson and you have a significant and a non-insignificant part of this country, the MSNBC crowd basically, who totally agree with her. They will completely agree with every single word of her dissent, and they will be left scratching their heads trying to figure out why it is that they were slapped down in the first place. It's because they've just willfully and over a long period of time had a completely fried mental model of the world. And I really do attribute this just to mass media and fiction and the mass consumption of pop history rather than actually understanding our true history. Of course, Will, this begs the question of, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't Ketanji Brown Jackson Harvard Law?
Yeah, Harvard Law. Just because you got into Harvard Law doesn't mean you're all that sharp. I can speak as someone who went to an elite law school that I wasn't that impressed with a decent number of my colleagues. Like, just because you got into a good law school, you graduated from it, doesn't mean you have a good handle on the law. And this is really basic constitutional law 101. The law of standing is something you discuss in your first year of law school. The idea of constrained judicial powers is something you discuss in your first year of law school, and it's definitely something you cover in detail in a class called federal courts, which is something that anybody interested in clerking and is going to take. So yeah, this stuff is actually fairly straightforward. And part of the reason that I think the 6 conservative justices were so angry is that this is stuff a 1L would have gotten. They would have looked at her arguments and her dissent and been like, Ketanji, what are you thinking? This isn't even close. This repudiates the law of standing that our court has developed over hundreds of years. It's like, there are close questions in the law. This isn't even one of them. Is the Supreme Court's jurisdiction constrained? Yes. Do we have to obey the Judiciary Act of 1789 when considering our equitable jurisdiction? Yes, because that's where it was granted. No kidding.